Welcome to this Actuarial Research Centre webinar on minimising longevity and investment risk while optimising future pension plans. We're delighted that so many of you have joined us today from around the world. My name is Andrew Cairns. I'm the Director of the ARC and I will be chairing today's webinar. The Actuarial Research Centre is the Institute and Faculty of Actuaries network of actuarial researchers around the world. The ARC aims to be a global network that delivers industry-relevant, cutting-edge research that address some of the significant challenges faced in actuarial science through a partnership of the actuarial profession, the academic community and industry. Research with impact. Our speaker today is Dr. Catherine Donnelly. Catherine is the co-principal investigator for this ARC research programme and the director of the Risk Insight Lab at Heriot-Watt University in Edinburgh, whose aim is to do life and pension research of relevance to industry. She is an actuary and an academic. This webinar will work best if you, the audience, get involved. So we want to hear from you. There will be 2 question and answer sessions during the webinar, one in the middle and one at the end. We might have more questions than we have time for during this hour, but responses to any questions that we don't get to will be posted on the website soon after the webinar. Below the live webinar, you can see part of the web interface where you can submit comments and or questions to the panel. You don't have to wait until the Q&A sessions. Please do start to submit questions at any time during the presentation. Just make sure that you're not watching the webinar in full screen, otherwise you won't be able to see the where to post questions. We will also have some live polls during the presentation. If you want to see the results of those and if you want to participate, so vote yourselves, then you have to vote in order to see the votes accumulating, and also you want to vote early so that you can see how things are coming and going in terms of other people voting. So with that, I'll now hand over to Catherine to start the presentation.
Thank you, Andrew. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Catherine Donnelly and I'm co-principal investigator of this research grant. Today we're going to talk about modern tontines. And modern tontines are a way of converting a pension pot into an income for life. And this is going to become increasingly important as more and more people are saving in defined contribution pension plans. And at the moment they only really have the choice between buying a life annuity and going into income drawdown in order to get an income for life. But the modern tontines offer a middle ground between those 2 options. So we are going to look at the basic structure of one particular modern tontine, and then we will go into some of the recent research results from our programme. Now this work is based, this presentation is based on work that I've done with various co-authors. So work with Thomas Bernhardt at Heriot-Watt, Montserrat Guillen of the University of Barcelona, Jens Perk Nielsen, who's the other co-principal investigator of this research grant at Cass Business School, and John Young, who's an actuary in Edinburgh. So as a first step though, we're going to ask you, the audience, a question. What option best describes tontines? So whenever someone says the word tontines to you, what option best describes it? So you've got 4 options. So option A, aren't they illegal? Option B, last survivor takes all, watch your back. Option C, higher retirement income than drawdown. Or option D, you've never heard of them. So please just select the option that best fits the words tontines, or the first word that comes into your mind that whenever you hear the word tontine.
Okay, so just as a reminder to the audience, that if you're in full screen mode, you might have to exit that at the moment. And then down at the bottom of the web interface, you'll see the place where you can participate in the poll. And you need to vote in order to see how the rest of the voting is going on in terms of the other people in the audience. So we've got the results in front of us now, and we can see that quite a good number of you have already voted. There's one front runner, but I'm not going to tell you yet what that front runner is. So we need to give people a chance to come up with your own opinion. So we've got plenty of votes, and I think maybe there's a reasonably clear winner, although there's another option which is in a close second place, but I think we'll call it a halt there. Well, you can continue to vote if you want to, but the main choice is that most people, most of you out in the audience haven't actually heard of a tontine, so you'll certainly find out more in the next few minutes about that. And then the next most popular group is that last survivor takes all, watch your back. So, right, so Catherine, I'll hand back to you.
Yeah, so this is interesting. So quite often when I present about modern tontines, quite often there's a comment from the audience about aren't they illegal, or they're about last survival takes all. And I want to emphasize modern tontines are not about last survival takes all. They're about converting a pension pot into an income for life, and they're going to work basically very much like a life annuity, except they don't have all the guarantees of a life annuity. Now, tontines are actually already in existence. There are many things in existence that are perhaps not called tontines, but they are operating in a way that I would consider as a tontine. And so we show some of these on the screen. So for example, there are life annuities offered by TIA in North America, and they look very much like regular life annuities, except the annuity income is adjusted for actual versus expected mortality. Mercer in Australia have launched a product called Lifetime Plus, and as part of that product, it seems there's definitely a tontine aspect. And there are various other startup companies have started doing tontines as well. Now, I have a very broad definition of tontine. So tontines for me are about pulling longevity risk, and it's just a way of doing that. And actually, the way I view tontines, life annuities are in fact a tontine, but with guarantees, right? So if you're working in a life insurance company, you might be recoiling at the thought of me calling a life annuity a tontine. But for me, the fundamental mechanism that allows a life insurance company to pay an income for life to its annuitants is the pooling of lives underneath that annuity. And it's just that in a life annuity, the life insurance company also adds in guarantees. So you're guaranteed the pension for life. In comparison, the pure tontine gets to the heart of the pooling of longevity risk among the group of people. It doesn't have the guarantees that you see with a life annuity. It's simply pooling longevity risk. And the purpose of modern tontines is to pay an income for life. So tontines have been in existence actually for centuries, but they did get a bad name for themselves, and there are quite a lot of people who, if you say the word tontine, well, the first thing you think of is illegal structures or last survivor takes all. So, you know, you think of turning up every year, you've a group of people who donate money to an old style tontine, and they turn up every year and see who's left alive, and at some time there'll be one person left alive and they'll get the pot. That's not what we're talking about here, right? So we're talking about people gaining longevity credits whenever they're alive, in order to allow them to sustain a higher income in retirement. So it's not about last survivor takes all. It's about an income for life as much as we can. So here we want to think about someone who's saving for their retirement in defined contribution pension pot. There will be more and more people in this situation as defined benefit pension schemes are closing down or closed to new entrants. And there are more and more people who will have to rely on a defined contribution pension pot in order to pay themselves an income for life. They might have the state pension, but that's it. So I want you to imagine that you're age 70 years old, you've been saving in a defined contribution pension plan for your life, and now what you have to do is convert your pension pot into an income for life. So what do you do? What are your options? Right, so we're going to imagine you're not an actuary who knows all about the insurance industry. And instead what you do is you go to this, we have a retirement options kiosk. He's going to offer us 4 possible options for converting that pension pot into retirement income. And we will assume that that person has £100,000 in their retirement pot and they need to convert that into an income. So two of the options we're going to show you will be based on tontines, and then the other two options will be just standard options that you would see today. So you're age 70, you have £100,000, and your first option is called a pure modern tontine. So if you invest it in this pure modern tontine, well, here we assume that you get an investment return of 2% per annum, and you have a certain mortality table. And we're going to be a little bit conservative about the income you could take from that modern tontine. So you could get just over £7,000 a year, an income payable until you're 120 years old, as long as you survive to 120 years old. And that's obviously assuming in this simple example that everything turns out as expected. But you get just over £7,000 a year from that tontine. However, because it's a pure tontine, if you die, then your heirs don't get anything. So there's nothing left to your estate. So you're converting your pension pot entirely into income. Now the second option we're going to offer you is also a tontine-related option, and it's called a modern tontine with bequest. So what you're going to do in the modern tontine with a bequest, and we'll talk about this product later, is you're going to give up some of the annual income in exchange for being able to leave something to your estate. So with a modern tontine with bequest, you can get an income of £6,600 a year, payable what should be for most people's lifetime until age 120. And if you die, what happens is your estate will get 20% of your pension tontine account at the time of death, right? Your pension pot at the time of your death. So those are the two options that are based on tontines. You could, of course, go for a life annuity. So with a life annuity, based on rates I looked up last week, if you buy a single life annuity, paying a constant amount per annum, you could get about £6,000 a year guaranteed for life. Right? So here we're making a distinction between the age at which you outlive your savings. So in the life annuity, you never outlive your savings. You're guaranteed to have that paid by the life insurance company. With the tontine, it's not guaranteed, right? But we try to set this payment so it's highly likely that you will, in almost all circumstances, get that tontine income for life. With the life annuity, of course, you exchange your pension pot for an income and there's nothing left to your estate whatsoever, right? So if you die having bought a life annuity, there's nothing left to your estate. Now you could also go into income drawdown, and here I've chosen an income level for income drawdown equal to the modern tontine with bequest. So with income drawdown, one option is you could withdraw £6,600 per annum income, but that would last you until you were 87. So it lasts you for 17 years, assuming that you had a 2% constant investment return each year. And what's left to your heirs? Well, that's just whatever's left in your pension pot at the time of death. So if you die after the age of 87, you've exhausted your funds and you've nothing left to your estate at that time. So those are the four options. So what we'd like you to do now is just to think about, if that was your options presented to you, you're age 70, what would you like to know most about, right? Which of these four options would you like to know more about? So we're not asking you which one would you choose, but which one would you like to know more about? So there are four options. Option A is a pure tontine, where you have the highest income, but you don't leave anything to your estate. Option B is a modern tontine with bequest. You give up some of the income in order to leave something to your estate. Option C is a life annuity. Again, you give up all of your pension pot for an income, but that income is highly secure, guaranteed for life. Though it's obviously less than the pure tontine, because in the pure tontine you're taking some longevity risk and investment risk. And option D is the income drawdown, where you have most flexibility about your income level. We've chosen a certain level here, £6,600, and whatever's left in your pension pot at the time of death, that's what you would give to your estate.
Okay, so we can see that there's quite a reasonable number of people that are already voting. If you've still to place your vote. The question is really about you as a consumer rather than
that's right,
as an actuary or advisor. So you've been given these options and you're wanting to find out more so that you can make your own choices. But I think we've got a good number of you've now voted, so I think we can start to move on. But the most popular answer is the modern tontine with the bequest. That's about 60% of you have found, well, that looks interesting for me as a consumer, and I want to find out more. And then the second choice is the pure tontine, around about 30%.
Well, that's good because, yes, we're obviously going to talk about modern tontines today, and we'll also tell you more about this modern tontine with bequest. That's part of the research we're currently doing in this research project. So we've got some interesting results around that and that structure. That's a new structure that we've proposed within the research. So let's talk about now what are modern tontines, right? And the heart of modern tontines is the pooling of longevity risk. Now, as I said before, that's what goes on in a life annuity contract, but whenever we learn about life annuities in actuarial education, we don't typically think of it in that way. We tend to think of it in terms of an equation, the net present value of a sum of discounted cash flows, where you pay the cash flows until someone's time of death and you take the expected value of that. And that's what we think of as a life annuity. But here, when we're talking about modern tontines, we want to get to the heart of the pooling of longevity risk. So we'll just take a step back and we'll look at a life annuity contract. So what goes on in that? So you think of it as a contract between the annuitant and the insurance company, and the annuitant comes with their £100,000 to the insurance company and gives it to the insurance company in exchange for an income for life. It's a contract, a financial contract. So they give over that pension pot, £100,000 to the insurance company, and in exchange get, say, £6,000 a year until they die. So they get that every year until they die. Now, how can the insurance company guarantee a payment for life? Well, what's happening is it's not just selling one contract to one person, it's selling hundreds, if not thousands, of contracts to many, many people. And it's pulling those lives together. So as we go forward in time, the money that those people have paid across initially to the insurance company, it will grow with investment returns, but it's also shrinking because there's income being paid out from it. But as we go forward in time, there will be people dying among those annuitants, and the insurance company no longer has to pay them any money. And what's happening is payments to the survivors is being subsidised by deaths among the people who died earlier. Right? So earlier deaths are subsidising the payments to the survivors in the life insurance life annuity contract. And of course, there's more to the life annuity contract than that, because it's a guaranteed payment for life, no matter what the death rate is or how it evolves in the underlying group of people. And the insurance return, the investment return is guaranteed, but effectively it's been enabled by this pooling of lives in the pool, in the annuity contract. So if you were able to compare a life annuity contract with income drawdown, and you were following exactly the same investment strategy, but we completely ignore fees, costs, and all those real-world things that are very important, we just assume we lived in this little perfect world, then if you're following the same investment strategy, you could get a higher, sustainable, lifelong income from a life annuity than from an income drawdown. And the reason is the pooling of longevity risk. And it seems that the only way you can pull longevity risk is through buying a life annuity. But that's not true. We can do exactly the same with the modern tontine. It's going to do the pooling of longevity risk, it's just not going to have the guarantees. So if you're very risk averse, you're probably better buying a life annuity. But if you're willing to take some risk, then you could consider a modern tontine. So what happens in the modern tontine? Well, with a life annuity contract, we had the insurance company as basically the central party here. So in the modern tontine, we get rid of that insurance company, because that was basically enabling people to pull their longevity risk indirectly. We're going to get rid of that insurance company and basically get people to pull their longevity risk directly with one another in the tontine. Now, there will have to be an administrator of this who will enable the money in this tontine to be reallocated among everyone. But it's going to look very much like a life annuity in many ways, in terms of you have some money allocated to the tontine and you're going to withdraw an income from that money. Now, we can't escape from many of the problems of life annuities, so issues like adverse selection and so on, we can't escape from that. And so this is definitely why we need the longevity risk in the pool to be pooled for the lifetime. But what we're going to see is that with the tontine, you can have more innovation than is apparent with a life annuity. So this decomposing of basically longevity risk, the pooling of longevity risk from investment return, these two things that are mixed up in a life annuity, we can separate those in a tontine and they will allow us to do some innovative things. So again, I just have to keep saying this because most people, when they think of tontines, think last survivor. Not at all. The aim is a retirement income. It's not about a life or death gamble. There have been various tontine structures proposed. Most of them aim for what's called actuarial fairness, right? So you should not be gaining from pooling your risk, your longevity risk with anyone. It should be actuarially fair from the sense that you're sharing your actuarial risk, your risk of living or dying. And what we're going to do is introduce a very simple method of sharing longevity risk. So this is a method proposed by myself and my co-authors Montserrat Guillen and Jens Perk Nielsen, the other co-PI in the programme. And it's a very, very simple rule that we're going to look at. There are other rules, we'll mention them afterwards, that have also been proposed, but this is just a very simple way. Now, I classify tontines into two broad ways. So one is an implicit tontine, and the aim of an implicit tontine is very specifically to pay an income to the individuals. So it will, rather than having an individual account, it will be really focused on paying you an income. The other classification are explicit tontines. And these are ones in which you explicitly will see what you're gaining from pooling longevity risk as you go forward in time. So with the explicit tontine structure, everyone would have an individual account. They would gain investment returns on that account. They would make withdrawals from that account, so withdraw an income to live on. And they would also gain longevity credits, and those longevity credits are from the pooling of longevity risk in the pool, in the tontine. And the idea is that every so often we say, are you alive or dead? If you're dead, your account value is shared out among the other participants, or all the members of the pool, the members of the tontine, and that's where the longevity credits come from. If you're alive, then you will gain longevity credits from other deaths in the pool, you'll gain investment returns, and you make withdrawals. And this would be a simple account-based system of how you would operate a modern tontine. So it would look very much like a drawdown account, except you would have longevity credits in addition to investment returns. And those longevity credits are, as long as you're alive, they're in the worst case 0, and otherwise they're strictly positive. And the other difference is, in addition to the longevity credits, is if you die, then these funds, this account that's earmarked for the tontine, you would essentially lose that upon death. So let's look at an actual rule for calculating longevity credits. So this is from myself and my co-authors. So we have a group of people, and they have earmarked their individual accounts for the tontine, and they know that based on this account value, they will gain longevity credits, and they also know that if they die, they're effectively giving up this tontine, their own account value, to the other members of the tontine. So everybody in the tontine is becoming the beneficiaries of each other. So they can each do their own investment strategy, so no one is constrained to follow a particular investment strategy. They can choose an investment strategy suitable for their own risk preferences. They can all be very different. They can be different ages and so on. However, given the benefits you get from the tontine, it's usually better if you're older, because that's when you start getting significant longevity credits. If you're younger, your longevity credits will generally be smaller, roughly be smaller, but you risk losing your money if you die, and it just seems sort of too great a gamble. In a sense, I say a gamble in that sense. We really are focusing on income in retirement. And we're not aiming this for young people whatsoever. It's for an income in retirement. So let's say someone dies in the fund, and what we're going to do is share out their account value among everyone. So everyone in the group at the time of death, they each have a force of mortality. That's like a chance of death at that time. And of course, your force of mortality increases over time, but at that time of Bob's death, everybody has a particular chance of death at that time. Everyone has an account value. There will be different account values, but we can easily see that. And what we do is we take the product of the force of mortality and the account value for each individual. And that's like you're exposed to risk, because effectively your account value is what you risk if you die, and your force of mortality is like your instantaneous chance of dying. So it's like you're exposed to risk. And to share out Bob's account value, we take, for each individual, we take their own exposed to risk, their own force of mortality by their own account value, and we divide that by the sum of those exposed to risks over the entire group. And that's the fraction that individual will get of Bob's account value. Right, so it's a very, very simple rule. And it's actuarially fair, right? So you do not expect to gain from that. So allowing for the chance of you gaining money from other people dying, and for the chance of you yourself dying and losing your account value, the expected value of that is 0 overall, right? So there's no gaming of the system here. You can update those forces of mortality over time. So, you know, when people enter the tontine, there may be a certain expectation about how those forces of mortality will evolve. But as we go forward in time, we have, you know, population mortality updates. We can update those over time. So it's not that you're locked into a certain force of mortality over time. So there are various features about this. There will be volatility in that longevity credit, right? Because we're not guaranteed anyone is going to die. So there will be volatility about it. However, as we said before, as long as you're alive, that longevity credit will be at least equal to 0, right? So it won't be negative until you die, if you think of dying as a negative longevity credit. And here we're just rearranging money in the pool. So we're not creating new money, we're just rearranging money among the members of that tontine pool. So the group is still left with longevity risk, right? It doesn't eliminate longevity risk. So you're not guaranteed an income for life like you are with a life annuity. And that might mean that, or it's very likely to mean that, you have to adjust the income you're withdrawing. If you want a sustainable, cost-efficient income for life, then you may need to adjust that income up or down according to what the experience is and how expectations of future mortality or longevity changes. And as I said before, we've still got the anti-selection risk that we have for life annuities. But already we can see some things we can't do with a life annuity. So because you in a sense pay for your longevity credits upon your death, right? If you think of this, you giving up your account value upon your death as paying for your previously accumulated longevity credits, that means you can add in, you can use assets or allocate assets to the tontine that you couldn't normally consider with a life annuity. So a life annuity, you need to pay cash up front, really. With a tontine, you could consider, for example, putting in a proportion of someone's house value or some monetary amount of their house value. So you don't have to have it an account based. It could actually include other assets. So already some things you could consider. So with that, so just at that point, I think we'll stop and have some questions and answers. Now we've seen a basic tontine mechanism, how that would work.
Okay, so thank you for that. So the first part of the webinar presentation. So we're now open to the question and answer session. So we've got a few minutes now and then some more time towards the end of the webinar to for you, the audience, to ask questions. We've got a few questions in at the moment, but I would very much encourage you to start typing and ask some more questions, or if you want to make a comment, that's also very welcome. You might need to go to the bottom of the web interface to see where the place is for you to type in questions. So we'll kick off. The first question is, how many people do you need for a tontine to work?
Well, what we'd like to do is, because we're trying to pay an income for life, we'd like the law of large numbers to hold, right? So this is what we're aiming for, the law of large numbers to hold approximately, more or less. And for the law of large numbers to hold, well, we've probably seen that for some of us many years ago in a basic course in probability and statistics. And you typically see it in the case where everybody has the same, for example, future distribution of deaths and they're all independent lives. But in a tontine, we can have people with different forces of mortality and different expectations about their future lifetime. And so it will very much depend on the group as to how many people you need for the law of large numbers to hold approximately. So we can't say there's a single number and that's what you need, because it will depend on the composition of the group. So this does have to be studied. Now, my co-authors and I have studied this. In this paper, we introduced this tontine mechanism, explicit tontine, and we were considering both the volatility of your returns from the longevity credits and the volatility from investment returns. And we looked at various groups. We looked at people who were over retirement age and who had, for example, a decreasing amount in their account to allow for the fact that they have saved up for their retirement and now they're drawing down their pension savings. And what we found is actually to maintain a fairly reasonable volatility, you perhaps only need a few hundred people with what we described as moderate heterogeneity, a few hundred people in total. However, it really does depend on the group, so we can't give you a definitive answer about that. So the more homogeneous the group, the fewer people you need, the more heterogeneity there are in the group, the more people you need.
Okay. The next question is, do all participants need to join the tontine at the same time, or can people come in at a later date?
Yes, people do not need to join at the same time. So one of the features of this particular tontine structure is that it's actuarially fair at all points in time. So that means that if we didn't have these problems about adverse selection and moral hazard, in theory, and that it is in theory because this isn't in the real world, in theory you could actually leave the tontine at the end of each day if you wanted. But because of, as I said, adverse selection, we're not saying you should do that, you should be in it for life. However, that means this actuarial fairness means you can have people joining at different days. You know, there's no restriction on when you should join, so you don't need to set it up and everybody join at once. You can have people joining at different times. However, if you were going to set up one of these things, again, what we're focusing is on an income for life. So this structure I showed you is actuarially fair no matter how many people are in it. So 2 people, 3 people, and so on. However, since the focus is on an income for life, we want to be able to tell people with some certainty, a reasonable degree of certainty based on current information, how much should they withdraw on that. So you would like to start off with a certain number of people in order that we are fairly close to law of large numbers, perhaps with some expectation of us getting close to law of large numbers. But actuarial fairness holds no matter how many people are in it.
Okay. The next question is, how can we say that a tontine is to pay an income for life when there is no guarantee?
Yes, so basically what we're aiming to do is pay an income for life. So this is, I guess we have to be very careful about how we say this. So what we're aiming to do is pay an income for life, and what we want to do is set the income that someone is able to withdraw from the tontine to a sustainable level so that we're confident that it will be an income for life. So it isn't guaranteed, that is for sure. It's not guaranteed like a life annuity, but that also has the benefits that you should get, and this is an expectation, a higher expected income from the tontine than from a life annuity, because you do have to pay for the guarantees of a life annuity. However, of course, if things do not turn out as expected and they turn out worse than expected, everybody lives to their 100, then the income you've been withdrawing was too high. We would then look back in retrospect and say the income was too high, it was not sustainable, and you could end up with a much lower income. However, we should be able to, if we've got reasonable predictions of future mortality, we should be able to adjust the income in time to avoid people actually running out of money.
And can the individuals themselves really choose how much they're taking out, so that, or would it be sort of a mechanism that is in the contract that they set up at the beginning?
Well, I think this gets really back to the adverse selection, moral hazard viewpoint, that we do want to have the income for life, and that would be the purpose of it, and it's not about you you have some personal knowledge about your own future expectations of life, and we don't want any people acting in a way that's against the principle of what we're trying to do here.
Okay. Yep. And then the last question for this section is, how similar is a tontine with takaful insurance?
I actually don't know the answer to that. So I don't know enough about tackable insurance to answer that, unfortunately.
So an interesting
interesting
sort of question. I think we need to, or you need to go away and think about that. And,
yes, I do.
If you're the person in the audience that asked that question, please do contact Catherine to just follow up on that, just to compare what the systems are.
Yes, so I actually would be very interested to know about that. Yeah.
Okay, well, I'll pass back to you for the second part of the presentation.
Okay, so we've seen one method of doing sharing longevity risk, and that's one that's studied with myself and my co-authors. There are indeed other methods, so I don't want you to think that it's just us doing it, in that there are more and more people becoming interested in this, and there are more and more companies becoming interested in this, and we're seeing more and more startups with the word tontine in them as well. So we're reclaiming the word tontine from its poor connotations. So in the rule that you've just seen, just before the question and answer session, as we said, it's actuarially fair for any group of people. And this works because what happens is when someone dies, actually their estate gets a very small payment back. So it should be a small payment if you've got something close to law of large numbers holding. So this means that you don't have to worry about how rich anyone is and so on, what their individual forces of mortality are, other than you should have a good prediction of their own force of mortality. There is another author, Michael Sabin, has looked at tontines, a similar structure to ours, but he does an actuarially fair way that pays money only to the survivors. Right, so only the survivors will get a payment in Michael Sabin's one. And he constructs it very carefully so it's actuarially fair. And what happens though is that whenever you impose this survivor-only requirement on the method of allocating the longevity credit, you have to impose restrictions on the membership. So you just can't let anybody join. You have to look at the group, and if someone wants to join, you have to see, are they able to join the group? Or you may have to restrict, for example, how much money they can bring into the group. And there's also some very interesting things, because you would think survivor only would be the natural way of thinking about it, but it becomes extremely complicated then to calculate the longevity credit. And there are some interesting features, like, for example, you no longer have a unique way necessarily of allocating the longevity credit among the group of people when it's survivor only. If you allow for this small payment to the estate of the dead, that's our rule, then you don't have to worry about that, and it's a very simple rule. But if you prefer survivor only, then you end up with a more complicated rule, and that Michael Sabin has explored in various papers. Now, those are the two explicit tontine methods that could work with an account-based system. There are other ones, the implicit tontines I mentioned earlier, that focus very much more on giving people an income and not so much focusing on individual account values. And so there's one called the group self-annuitization scheme, that's been proposed by Piggott and others, and it's been investigated by other authors. So there's a bibliography at the end of this presentation that gives more references concerning this. And the Australian government is pushing the group self-annuitization scheme. They've actually changed their tax laws to try and encourage companies or insurance companies to offer this group self-annuitization scheme. And there's another implicit tontine proposed by Milevsky and Salisbury. So there is definitely work going on the tontine area, and it is becoming more and more popular. Now, so that's the introduction to modern tontines. That's how they fundamentally work. And now we're going to turn to work that we are doing on the research project. So you may have seen the sessional research event in May this year, presented by Jens Perk Nielsen, so self-selection and risk sharing in a modern world of lifelong annuities. So that was a customer-focused product, and in it there was a longevity risk sharing and also investment risk sharing at a point in time. So that was work done by the team at CAS. And here I'm going to present some recent work with Thomas Bernhardt, who's also at Heriot-Watt University. And we've proposed and we're investigating this modern tontine with Bequest. So this is a way of trying to overcome the Bequest limitations of the pure modern tontine. So the idea is that you have someone with their pension savings, and they're going to split their pension savings into two accounts. So one account I call a tontine account, and the other account I call the bequest account. And they put, say, 80% of their savings into the tontine account and 20% into the bequest account. And the idea is that the tontine account is the one earmarked for the tontine. So it's only on the tontine account you earn longevity credits. And the bequest account is the account that if you die, the amount in the bequest account, that's what's given over to your estate. So 80% in the tontine account, 20% in the bequest. Now again, this would be an account-based structure. So your tontine account and bequest account, they would be invested the same way. They would both accumulate at the same rate of investment returns. So they both grow at the same rate with investment returns. You would withdraw from them at the same rate. So you withdraw an income from them at the same rate. But the difference is that it's only on the tontine account that you're allocated longevity credits. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to rebalance those two account values to 80%, 20% every so often. So we're regularly going to rebalance that. And that's going to mean that actually some of those longevity credits are in effect transferred into the bequest account. Right, so we're going to have an interaction between the tontine and the bequest account. And this is going to enable us to pay some money to the estate of the person when they die. Right, so we're going to rebalance those two accounts. There will be an interaction between the tontine and bequest account. They're not two separate items. And the idea is very similar to before. So every so often you see someone alive or dead. If they're dead, then their tontine account value, that's shared out among the members of the participants of the tontine, and the estate of the person who's just dead, they get the value of their bequest account. If you're alive, then as before, you have your investment returns, you withdraw money from your accounts, both accounts at the same rate, and you also gain longevity credits, but only on the tontine account value. Right, so going back to the options I showed you earlier in the presentation, this was a modern tontine with bequest option. Right, so this is you were age 70, you had £100,000, you could obtain an income of £6,600 in the modern tontine with bequest, and the money left to your heirs was 20% of the pot at death. That was the bequest account, this 20% of the pot at death. And we can compare that to the income drawdown, where you could get the same income, but the same income, if everything turned out as expected, would only last you until you were 87, and then your money left to your heirs would be whatever's in your income drawdown account. Now let's look at the money left to your heirs, right? Because this is what you might be interested in if you're considering these two accounts. So not just the income for hopefully your life from the modern tontine with bequest, but also bequest amount. So we've got a graph here, and what we're showing on the x-axis is the age at death, going up from age 70, and on the left-hand side, the y-axis, that's showing you how much you would leave to your estate if you died at each particular age. So two dotted lines, so the one that's a dark blue dotted line, it starts off at the highest point at age 70 at £100,000. If you died at age 70 before you had the chance to withdraw any income, you would leave £100,000 to your estate if you were income drawdown. And that will decrease over time, so we're assuming here that you have an investment return of 2% per annum, and you're withdrawing £6,600 per year. That decreases over time until about age 87 you've exhausted your fund. Now we compare that to the modern tontine with bequest account, that's the red dotted line. So you've allocated 20% of your pension savings to the bequest account, and that means that if you died just before you were able to withdraw any income at age 70, you would leave £20,000 to your estate. Now as we go forward in time, that bequest account decreases slightly before finally increasing if you manage to live to quite an old age, but it decreases to about, at the worst case, about £9,000. So it's not going to make anyone rich, but it could, for example, pay for a funeral, and you're more likely to get an income for life. So what we see, in fact, with this is that with a tontine, modern tontine with bequest, you actually leave a higher bequest to your estate if you die after age 87. With the income drawdown, you run out of money by age 87, and you wouldn't leave anything to your estate, right? So the tontine count with Bequest, you do leave something to your estate. It's not a huge amount, but it could cover some things you may wish to be covered after your death. So what we were interested in finding out in the research was, we came up with this structure, and then we wanted to figure out, so how much should you allocate to your Bequest account versus your tontine account? So what percentage of your money should you put into your Bequest versus tontine account, given that you want to have an income for life, and you might have different strength of bequest motives. So some people might be very, very keen to leave money to their estate, and others not so keen. So what we find is that for what's considered normal levels of risk aversion, there's a fairly stable and high percentage you put into the tontine account value, regardless of the strength of your bequest motive. Now, it does vary a little bit with the strength of bequest motive, but not very much. When you were more risk-taking, you were less risk-averse, then I think the answer we got was more changing quite a lot, and I think it was more to do with the construction of the problem. Now, these results we did in a theoretical model. So what we were assuming here was what's called a perfect pool. So you're here transferring longevity credits from your tontine account to your bequest account effectively, and that's what's supporting this bequest account value over time as you age. So what we want to do is now say, okay, we've got these results in a theoretical model. What would it look like in a more practical model? So if you have a finite number of people, what would these results look like? And we use perhaps a more realistic way of assessing your aversion to risk. So this is our next step in this particular stream of looking at the modern tontines with Bequest, a more practical look on that after having done the theoretical part. Now, to summarise, so today we've looked at modern tontines. So we're trying to reduce the risk of running out of money in retirement. You're not eliminating that risk whatsoever. That's what life annuities do, but you're reducing it significantly, particularly compared to income drawdown. What we want to do is pay people an income for life. We don't want to have an income that's increasing over time, because I have seen some tontines that have been proposed by companies, and they're proposing an income that's increasing actually with your force of mortality. We're saying you don't have to do that. You can run it just like a life annuity, in the sense that you can withdraw a fairly stable income over time, but it won't be a life annuity in terms of it won't be a constant income. You will have to adjust it up or down in line with future expectations of longevity and life expectancy. But you should be in a much better situation than being an income drawdown, because everybody in that tontine is becoming the beneficiaries of one another, right? You're not restricted in your investment strategy, so you don't have to follow a low-risk investment strategy. You can if you want, but you don't have to. You can choose an investment strategy suitable for your personal circumstances. And as we've seen with this new account structure, you can incorporate bequests. Now, it may not be so much the particular structure we've suggested here, but with this decomposition in the tontine of separating longevity credits from investment returns, you can allow for a lot more innovation, and you can rethink things that you wouldn't even consider doing it with a life annuity, right? So it can enable innovation a great deal, but we don't want this to be risky innovation. We want people, again, income for life. That's what we're very much focused on. You could, for example, provide some downside protection for people. So if there aren't, for people to protect people against the risk of fewer deaths than expected occurring in the pool. So the people in the pool could pay some insurance premium to an insurance company. The insurance company could take the risk of fewer deaths than expected happening in exchange for a fee, for example. So people will always have some minimum longevity credit value. And as I said earlier, we could include assets that you can monetize, for example, someone's house. Obviously, there'd be a lot of technical regulatory issues around doing that, but there are many things you can consider doing that you couldn't consider doing with a life annuity. Tontines could also provide the foundation for a collective DC scheme. So either explicitly as a collective DC scheme, it could be basically a tontine, a modern tontine. And in my view, actually, collective DC schemes that pay out an income to people are effectively tontines, or pulling longevity risk among a group of people. It could also be offered within an individual DC pension plan. You could offer this as a retirement option, because often there's no obvious retirement option to convert DC pension savings into an income for life in a DC plan. And this could be offered to the members of that DC plan. Right, so we don't want to leave people alone wondering what to do with their big pension pot. We need to give them options for retirement income. So we turn to our last question. So we previously asked near the start of the presentation about these 4 options, retirement options, 2 of them tontines, 2 of them not. And we'd asked before, which one do you want to know more about? But now we're asking, which one would you choose? So having learned a little bit about tontines, so the pure tontine, the modern tontine with Bequest, we've still got the life annuity on the table, still got income drawdown. Which one would you choose if you were age 70 with £100,000 and you want to have an income?
Okay, so the poll is now open. So it's the same 4 options as before, but you think of yourself as the consumer, and you've now got your pot of money. So what are you going to do with it? So the votes are coming in at the moment. Still, just a few people have voted so far, so we need to give you all a chance to think about it, reflect back on what Catherine has been saying over the last few minutes. We have a reasonable front runner, but we'll give you a few more minutes, or a few seconds, not minutes, because we'll run out of time.
Yes, we're also trying to reclaim the word tontine here, because first of all, when I started presenting material on tontines, I was trying to avoid using the tontines because most people go, tontines aren't they illegal or something like that. So but since there's so many companies now using the word, startup companies who are involved in tontines using that word, it's becoming more popular in the literature. I think we should just reclaim the word tontine, but maybe prefix it by modern tontine to say it's not the same as necessarily the tontines of the past. So you don't think
that we need to come up with a new word for it?
I think because when you say the word tontine, people know what you're talking about, that you're pulling longevity risk. They know that. It's just more the how you're doing it. That's perhaps more the argument. But they know what area you're talking about. Whereas there are a lot of other terms people have, and we have come up with before, but they don't really know what that means.
Yeah. Okay, well, on the poll, we've had a good number of responses now. So the clear and most popular choice is the modern tontine with the Bequest, and then the pure tontine that's coming out as the sort of second choice. You've done a good sales pitch, I would
yes, and I
probably
need to
say
set up my company. So we'll move on now to the last question, and this is a word cloud question. So we're asking you to type in 3 distinct keywords that you take away from the webinar. So 3 keywords that you take away.
Okay, so this is really just for a bit of instant feedback, and it's a bit of fun, but it's really just for us to find out, what things that have been talked about in the presentation have really had a bit of impact in terms of your own thinking. We'll leave that open for a few minutes, and because you might want to just think about that, but please certainly start typing, and as we move into now the questions and comments part.
That slide.
And then we'll perhaps come back to the word, or we hopefully will come back to the word cloud right at the end of the webinar. So we're now into the final Q&A section. We've got a few minutes left. We've got a few questions that have come in. I'll maybe start off with a question on my own parts before we move to the questions from the audience, and it links to what you were saying about the bringing in housing or a house as an asset. So does the mechanism within a single pool, would individuals be allowed to choose their own investment strategy? So could you have one person 100% equities and another person all in bonds?
Yes, that's correct. So individuals can choose their own investment strategy. However, it's rather more to the setup. So we are in a world in which most people really have no idea about how to invest, and probably it should be structured as in there's a very strong, clear default investment setting. So if we're in an account-based system, there should be a very strong default investment strategy for those who have really no idea about investments. And it could be that the ones who are more financially aware, more financially literate, they can have the choice. So you could always have a choice, but there's a strong label default. But certainly because this actuarial fairness holds at every point in time, you can choose your own investment strategy. So theoretically, there's no issue with that.
Okay. Going back to the questions. And this is perhaps a question about the UK. An insurer could not, starts off as a comment, so I guess, but you might want to respond. So an insurer could not operate a tontine as the capital requirements might outweigh the benefits of longevity credits. And then also, are there perhaps mis-selling risks?
So I'm not an expert in regulation. However, we don't think you should need capital to set this up, and it really depends. Well, insurer could operate it. It could be within a pension plan. So as we mentioned before, some sort of collective DC or within an individual DC plan. But the point is, because there are no guarantees, you shouldn't need any capital against those guarantees. So focusing on the guarantees aspect of it. So you're not guaranteeing people anything. You're just relying on this pooling mechanism, everybody becoming the beneficiaries of each other, and having this way of sharing out the funds of those who have died among everybody in the group. So we don't have the guarantees of a life annuity. You could put in those guarantees if you want it, and then there would be capital requirements, obviously. But in the pure tontine, there are no guarantees. So there shouldn't be any capital for guarantees. Whether you need capital just to operate this, then that's out of my realm of expertise.
And then are there mis-selling issues?
Well, I
that
think
you could foresee, and perhaps how would you avoid those?
Yeah, so the mis-selling would rather be about the income in retirement. So what we want to do is have an income, sustainable income. So these forces of mortality should be updated regularly, and that would mean that effectively you're updating expectations of how long people are going to live for, and that means that will impact the income, the sustainable income you can withdraw for life. So it may be that if things turn out again much worse than expected, people enter this tontine believing they would get a certain level of pension. So for example, they were going to get £7,000, and then over the years it's perhaps downrated to say 6,700 or something, and they might see that as a mis-selling or miscommunication. So again, you have to communicate to people very clearly the risk that their income is not guaranteed, and it can go down. It can also go up, but it can also go down. So we tend to focus on the downside risks.
Yeah, of course. Next question is, what type of provider would offer a modern tontine? Is it better suited, perhaps, say, to a friendly society?
Well, I don't think ignoring the regulation aspects of it, I don't think there's a better provider. We just want someone who's going to run it in the best interest of the people in the tontine. So they're going to do a fair assessment of everybody's forces of mortality and so on, and they're going to give them good information about the sustainable income to withdraw. So it's not that there's a particular group who are necessarily best placed to do that, but as long as they do that, then it should be running the interests of the people in the tontine.
Another question is, it sounds pretty complicated. How would you explain it to the less financially literate?
Yes, so what I think is actually you should really be focusing on income, what you're telling people's income, rather than focusing on, for example, year by year investment returns and longevity credits. You should really be telling people primarily the income they're going to get from this. And again, communicating the risk that if things don't turn out as expected, that this income can go up or down. So for example, show them 3 possible scenarios. So one is your best estimate or slightly prudent below best estimate scenario, and then perhaps one a more positive scenario and one a more negative scenario. So communicate in a very simple way that, okay, we think your income should be this, that you should withdraw, but it may fall down to this lower level or it may increase, but allow them to see that there is a variability in that income. And again, very much focus on income, because that's what's meaningful to people, whereas a lump sum of money is not meaningful. If you have a lump sum of money, you have to try and guess how long you're going to live for, your investment returns. It's a very, very complicated problem, and we shouldn't be asking people to do that.
Okay, well, we've unfortunately run out of time now for to take any more questions, but as I mentioned before, Catherine will be able to respond to those questions, and those responses will be posted on the website along with the slides in the next few days. We can just briefly go to the word cloud, and I can see that the sort of top words are, unsurprisingly, tontine, longevity, pooling, bequest, and then it's lots of other ideas that people have put down there. So thank you all for participating in that, and of course thank you for joining us for this webinar. Just leaves me to thank Catherine for the presentation that we've had in the last hour.
Thank you.
And I say thank you again, and goodbye.